A thin golden signal climbs off the earth and pushes outward into a darkness with no floor and no ceiling. It carries our voices, our arithmetic, the shape of everything we know. Then it reaches a line no telescope has ever drawn, and it stops. Not fades, stops clean, like a wall someone poured and let harden. You have spent your whole life assuming that the quiet out there means nobody is listening. But what if the quiet means something is? A door being held shut from the other side. We are going to walk from that legend to the evidence, name by name and year by year. And what waits at the end is stranger than the myth we started with. So we begin where the question began, at a lunch table in Los Alamos, New Mexico, in 1950. The physicist Enrico Fermi looked up at his colleagues and asked something almost childish. Fermi looked up from the table and asked, flatly, "Where on earth is everybody?" The men around him had just spent years learning how to end the world, so they understood scale. They knew the galaxy was old and enormous and generous with time. The Milky Way alone holds roughly 100 billion stars. If each star were a single grain of sand, the pile would bury a city. Old worlds should have filled the sky with signals long before we arrived to hear them. But nobody out there had ever sent one back. That gap between crowded and silent became the Fermi Paradox, and it has not closed in 3/4 of a century. Tonight, in a dark control room, a radio astronomer sits alone with a bank of receivers on the night shift. She has done this same quiet shift for years, alone with the receivers. The needles hold flat, and the speakers hiss with nothing but empty static. She waits, again, for a voice that has never once answered back. But the receivers stay silent, and for the first time it occurs to her that silence this total might have to be built. In 1973, radio astronomer John Ball heard the same silence as everyone else, and refused to read it the easy way. Others heard an empty galaxy. Ball heard a locked door, and named the idea the zoo hypothesis. The claim is simple and unsettling. Advanced civilizations, he argued, deliberately avoid contact. They treat young worlds like ours the way a keeper treats a protected reserve. Watched closely, fed nothing, and told nothing at all. Notice what the idea does. It takes the absence of a signal, which sounds like proof of nobody, and turns it into evidence of somebody choosing not to speak. That is a very different thing. Silence, in Ball's reading, is not the empty room. It is the observer standing quietly in the hallway, deciding you are not ready. But an idea does not go quiet on its own. It needs a world ready to believe it. And the world of the early 70s was primed. This was the height of the Cold War, when the fear of ending our own species had become ordinary weather. A generation had grown up rehearsing its own extinction. When people already suspect they live in a cage of their own making, a cage built by someone kinder is almost a comfort. The zoo hypothesis never arrived as cold logic. It arrived as a mood believers pressed further. If a wiser civilization looked at us, a species that split the atom and immediately built a bomb, quarantine would be mercy, not cruelty. Keep the dangerous child behind glass until it grows up, or until it doesn't. Hold on to the picture Ball left us, not a void, but a boundary. An invisible line drawn somewhere out past the planets, curving all the way around the solar system. A membrane you cannot see and have never once been allowed to cross, drawn all the way around us. But if that boundary is real, the next question is whether anything else in the record quietly agrees with it. An engineer leans toward a screen where a single dot has just brightened past a threshold. A distant star has dimmed by a fraction of a percent, right on schedule, because a world crossed its face. She marks it confirmed, logs the time, and moves straight to the next signal. Kepler did not look for aliens. It watched one patch of sky for the small, regular shadows that planets make. But the tally it left behind is hard to hold in the head. Before Kepler was retired, it confirmed more than 2,700 worlds beyond our own solar system. And the pattern underneath that number is the real weight of it. Nearly every star we look at closely, it seems, carries planets of its own. Not the lucky few, almost all of them. Now widen the frame to the whole galaxy. Now multiply that pile of sand by the worlds we now know circle almost every star out there. Multiply the grains by the worlds, and you get a galaxy that should be crowded. An ocean of real estate, warm and rocky and old enough for something to have started. This is where most people expect the mystery to soften. It does the opposite. Because more chances should mean more voices. By now, the skies should be loud with 1,000 overlapping voices. Instead, the dial holds flat. She marks another world confirmed, and the wall from the last chapter suddenly owes us an answer. So the myth from the last chapter suddenly has a debt to pay. A hidden wall around us was easy to imagine when the galaxy felt empty. It is far harder to explain when the galaxy turns out to be full. The old story needed the reserve to be nearly deserted, empty enough to explain the silence. The new numbers hand that old story something far worse to account for. More worlds than anyone expected. So if the silence still holds, what exactly is it going to take to break it? So the astronomer on the night shift keeps listening, and the question underneath her whole job is simple. If the sky is that crowded, how do you even begin to hear one voice in it? You do not just point a dish upward and hope. You build a method, and the method is the real story here. It starts with a man and a piece of chalk. In 1961, Frank Drake wrote an equation to count the talking civilizations sharing our galaxy. It was not a lucky guess dressed up in symbols. It broke one impossible question into smaller ones. How many stars? How many planets? How many that ever learned to speak? Drake was not claiming an answer. He was giving the silence a shape you could test. And that unfinished equation is exactly what the astronomer inherits tonight. Her whole trade is one long attempt to fill in Drake's blanks with real numbers. She checks a frequency, sees a spike, and does not celebrate. She rules it out. A satellite, a microwave, the hum of our own machines pretending to be a stranger. Then she logs it anyway. Another null result, dated and filed. Because this is the part people forget when they picture a search like hers. Off and on for more than 6 decades, through funding cuts and dead years, the search has swept the skies for one signal. 60 years is longer than most careers. It is longer than most marriages. Whole lifetimes have been spent leaning toward a receiver that never spoke back. Here is what that patience actually proves once you stop and add it up. The method is sound. The listening is real. A silence surviving 60 rigorous years stops looking like a gap. It looks like an answer. So the astronomer writes the date, closes the log, and waits for the next frequency to lie to her. Because what kind of quiet holds that long on purpose? In 1974, a small crowd stood beneath the Great Dish at the Arecibo Observatory and watched a single message leave the Earth. It was aimed at a distant cluster of stars, coded into a burst of radio light, and it carried a simple picture of who we are. This was humanity's first real knock on the cosmic door. The people who sent it knew the truth and sent it anyway. The message would not arrive for 25,000 years, and no answer could return before their great-great-grandchildren were dust. They knocked into a room they would never see opened. The other knock is still traveling. In 2012, Voyager 1 became the first human object to cross into interstellar space, out past the reach of the sun's wind. It had been flying for the better part of a working lifetime just to get that far. And here is the part that quiets a room. After all that time, it is still less than 1,000th of the way to the next star. We threw 2 stones into a dark that never once threw one back. Neither has been answered, and neither ever really left the yard. So the silence deepens, and a serious mind has to ask why. One answer is a wall. Someone out there choosing not to reply. But in 1996, the economist Robin Hanson offered a colder one. He called it the Great Filter, some barrier so severe that almost no civilization survives long enough to be heard at all. Not a hand holding the door shut, nobody home to hold it. A door that almost never gets built because whoever tries usually dies first. 2 explanations now sit side by side on the desk, and neither has been ruled out. The boundary the first signal struck fits both, a wall kept up by watchers, or a wall of graves we simply haven't joined yet. The evidence so far agrees with either. But there is a difference that should frighten you more than either wall alone. One silence might be imposed on us from outside. The other we may be building ourselves, and the next chapter is where that gets tested. Two walls sit side by side now, and neither has been ruled out. But every wall has a builder. But before we choose between them, watch how a wall like this actually grows. It grows from us, not from anything out there. Go back to a desert before dawn. In 1945, in the flat sand near Alamogordo, a small group of physicists lay on the ground and waited. And then the first nuclear detonation lit the New Mexico desert brighter than the sun. Some of them cheered. One of them, the man who ran the project, is said to have gone very quiet. He had proof of something no generation before him ever held. Humanity could now end itself. That light didn't just show us the bomb, it showed us ourselves. After that, the numbers stopped being about physics and started being about fear. By 1986, the world held over 60,000 warheads, enough to circle the planet many times over. Picture one loaded gun for every town on Earth, and then thousands more with no town left to aim at. No one out there fired at us. The danger was ours, aimed at our own cities. So after that light, we started watching the sky differently, waiting for someone else to answer for it. In 2021, the Pentagon reported over 140 unexplained aerial encounters logged by military pilots. The report itself drew no such conclusion, but believers read those blips as drones, monitors checking on us from out there. Someone checking on the animal that just learned to burn down its own enclosure. But notice what really happened here. The wall did not appear when a telescope caught something new. It appeared and thickened exactly as our own power grew. A species that has just frightened itself will imagine a watcher, because a watcher is easier to face than an empty room. Which leaves one hard question standing in the dark, waiting for an answer. Is the wall getting more convincing because someone out there keeps building it higher, or because we are the ones telling the story? Right now, a telescope drifts far past the moon, holding perfectly still against the cold. Since it opened its eye in late 2021, the James Webb Space Telescope has been reading the chemistry of distant atmospheres. For the first time, we can search for the fingerprints of life without ever leaving home. It is the finest ear we have ever built, listening toward that same invisible line. Follow that gold signal one last time. It leaves Earth, climbs into the dark, and stops. But watch it now from both sides at once. On our side, a thin line reaches out, patient and hopeful. On the other side, something holds it gently back, the turn this whole case bends toward. We kept asking whether the wall was built to keep us in, to protect the galaxy from a young and violent species. Maybe we had the door facing the wrong way. Maybe the wall was never about protecting them from us. Maybe it protects us from whatever raised that wall of graves, whatever is still standing on the other side of the silence. Here is where honesty has to interrupt the story. We do not know that any wall exists. Science can only report what it has measured, and so far it has measured absence, a sky that has stayed quiet through more than 6 decades of listening. Absence is not a wall. It is only a question we have not closed. That gap is real, and no telescope built so far has managed to fill it. So the case ends where every honest case should, on an open edge. If that line vanished tomorrow and you could hear one thing from the far side, which would you truly want? An answer or the same silence you have always known? Tell me your answer in the comments. The receivers glow for no one but her. Whichever wall this is, watchers or graves, the myth was real, just not the way the legend remembers it. The silence has not broken. It is only waiting, so which of you speaks first?